A marked man walks east from Eden, driven into a wilderness whose very name means wandering, carrying the blood of his brother on his hands. Genesis 4, 16 inches. The King James Version states his exile with brutal efficiency. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. The dust has barely settled on the first murder in human history. The earth is still crying out from the spilled blood. And then, the very next verse drops a paradox onto the page that has haunted readers for thousands of years. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived, and bare Enoch, and he builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Stop right there. Who was in the land of Nod? The canonical text records exactly 3 living human beings. On the earth, at the moment of Abel's death, Adam, Eve, and Cain. Yet the marked exile finds a bride in the dust of his wandering. The scroll gives her a womb, a son, and a walled city to inhabit, but it refuses to give her an origin. It gives her no father. It gives her no name. Picture it, a man exiled from the face of the earth, suddenly building the first human empire with a woman who stepped out of the blank space between the lines of Genesis. Turn the page to Genesis chapter 5. A haunting rhythm begins to beat against the parchment. A patriarch lives, fathers a named son. And then the text repeats an identical refrain. Genesis 5-4 reads, "And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. Adam begat daughters. Seth begat daughters. Enos begat daughters." The pattern locks in, but the ink dries before a single one of those women is named. The canonical scroll enforces a deliberate, heavy silence over the first women of the human timeline. By stripping their names from the page, Genesis forces our eyes strictly onto the male lineage leading down to Noah. But there is an ancient Jewish writing that refuses to leave the blank space empty. The Book of Jubilees, an ancient text preserved entirely within the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, and known to the early church as the Little Genesis, steps directly into this void. Found among the Dead Sea Scrolls sealed in the caves of Qumran, Jubilees is obsessed with timekeeping. It records the events of early Genesis through a strict mathematical grid of weeks and Jubilee cycles. And it absolutely refuses to let the earliest women remain anonymous shadows. Watch what the text does. Where our Genesis scroll leaves an uncomfortable anonymity, Jubilees brings exactness. It brings a timeline, and most importantly, it brings names. It tells us exactly who walked into the land of Nod with the murderer. It forces us to confront the reality that the 2 opposing bloodlines of early humanity, the city of the killer and the lineage of the righteous replacement, were not just abstract warring factions. They were the divergent households of 2 sisters. Sit with that. The missing names are Awan and Azura. They are the hidden architecture of the pre-flood world. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact. But Jubilees hands us these 2 women to explain the unexplainable gap in the canonical record. 2 sisters, 2 divergent paths out of Eden. One walking east with a man marked by God, the other staying behind to heal a fractured family. A deliberate silence covers the first daughters in our canonical Genesis. But the timekeeper's scroll from the Ethiopian highlands cracks that silence open, exposing a math that makes the earliest human marriages deeply uncomfortable. Who was the first daughter born on earth? And exactly how many weeks of years did she wait before marrying the man who would murder her brother? A Bedouin shepherd boy throws a stone into a dark cave overlooking the Dead Sea in the winter of 1947, listening for the sound of a lost goat, but hearing instead the shatter of ancient pottery. Out of the dust of Qumran come the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among the oldest fragments pulled from those sealed jars is a text the Western Church had set aside for centuries, yet one, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, kept fiercely protected, high in the mountains of the Horn of Africa. The Book of Jubilees. Same book, same math, same exact names. Reading, not inventing. Jubilees is not a book of new theology. It is a book of extreme, almost obsessive, timekeeping. It takes the familiar Genesis narrative and locks it into a rigid, inescapable mathematical grid. Everything is counted in weeks of years, 7-year cycles, and Jubilees 49-year blocks. The timekeeper's scroll leaves absolutely no room for ambiguity. In our canonical Genesis, the text tracks only the seed. The Hebrew legal focus is entirely on the male lineage leading down to Noah. Genesis 5 gives us the rhythm. Adam begat Seth, begat sons and daughters, and died. The women are reduced to an anonymous plural noun. They are structural necessities, stripped of their identities to keep the reader's eye moving toward the Messiah. But watch what the text of Jubilees does. It violently rejects that silence. The author of Jubilees opens the chronological ledger in chapter 4 and insists that if a human being was born in the first generations of the earth, their existence must be documented, their birth must be dated, and they must be named. Jubilees 4:1 reads, "And in the 3rd week in the 2nd Jubilee she gave birth to Cain, and in the 4th she gave birth to Abel, and in the 5th she gave birth to her daughter Awan." Read that again. Awan, the 5th week of the 2nd Jubilee, the first named daughter of Adam and Eve, the sister of Cain and Abel. Her name in Hebrew carries the root Awan, a word that echoes with iniquity, vanity, or nothingness. It is a heavy, dark shadow to hang over a child born onto a pristine earth. I offer it as that one tradition's record, a window into how the ancient Jewish mind solved the silence of the Genesis scroll. But by writing down her name, Jubilees changes the entire emotional architecture of the first family. We no longer have a blank space waiting in the land of Nod. We have a timeline. And the timeline Jubilees builds creates a devastating reality. Picture it. Awan grows up in a world with only 2 brothers. The math of the 2nd Jubilee means she is present for the rising jealousy. She is there for the rejected offering in the field. She is standing somewhere near the edge of Eden when Abel's blood hits the soil and cries out to the Lord. The canonical scroll says Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod. It says he knew his wife, but Jubilees hands us the unbearable context of that union. The woman who shares the murderer's bed is not a stranger from an unnamed tribe. She is the sister of the victim. One sister, born into the dawn of the world, watching her family fracture, over a slaughtered lamb and a pool of blood. But the timekeeper's scroll does not just give Awan a birth date. It records exactly when she made the darkest marital vow in human history. When the marked man walked east into exile, did he drag his sister with him, or did Awan willingly follow the killer into the wasteland? A quill presses into the parchment, dividing the dawn of humanity into strict, mathematical blocks of 49 years. To read the Book of Jubilees is to look at a ledger of human expansion. A Jubilee cycle is 49 years, broken down into 7 weeks of 7 years each. The author of this ancient text refuses the vague, compressed timeframes of the canonical scroll. Where our Bible simply says Adam knew his wife, the timekeeper pins it to the board. Cain is born in the 3rd week of the 2nd Jubilee. Abel arrives in the 4th. And in the 5th week, Awan is born. See the scene. The earth is entirely empty, save for one single, expanding camp. There are no other tribes. There are no distant cities across the mountains. Every human being alive eats from the same fire and sleeps under the same stars. In this claustrophobic proximity, the first daughter of humanity grows up watching two older brothers. Genesis 5-4 tells us that Adam lived 800 years after Seth, and he begat sons and daughters. The King James Version delivers that massive span of time in exactly 19 words. It compresses centuries of human births, marriages, and deaths into a single rushing breath, rushing us forward to Noah. But pause on that phrase, sons and daughters. Because there were no other humans created from the dust, the first generation faced a biological absolute. The only way the human race moves forward is through an act that Leviticus 18 would later strictly condemn and outlaw. Brother must marry sister. It is the uncomfortable reality of the early Genesis narrative, one that modern readers desperately try to explain away by inventing phantom races of other humans living outside Eden. The Timekeeper's scroll shuts down the phantom races. It looks directly at the uncomfortable reality and writes down the names. And then, Jubilees records a marriage that changes the entire emotional weight of the early world. Jubilees 4-9 states, "And Cain took Awan his sister to be his wife, and she bare him Enoch at the close of the 4th Jubilee." Read that again. At the close of the 4th Jubilee. The math here is devastating. According to the timeline Jubilees builds, the murder of Abel happens in the 3rd week of the 3rd Jubilee. The marriage of Cain and Awan does not happen until the end of the 4th Jubilee. Stop right there. That means Awan did not marry Cain before the murder. She was not already his wife when he struck his brother down in the field. The timeline dictates that the blood was already in the ground, the curse was already spoken, and the mark was already placed on Cain's flesh before he took his sister as his bride. This is one reading, not the final word. But if we follow the ledger of Jubilees, we are staring at a terrifying sequence of events. Awan watches her brother Abel die. She watches her parents shatter. She watches the Lord drive her eldest brother from the face of the earth, branding him a fugitive and a vagabond. And then she marries him. The canonical Genesis leaves Cain wandering alone into the land of Nod, suddenly finding a wife in the blank space of the text. Jubilees fills that blank space with the victim's little sister. She leaves the camp of Adam and Eve. She turns her back on the grieving parents. She walks east into exile, willingly binding herself to a man marked by God for murder. One sister, bound by blood to a slaughtered brother, walking away into the wilderness with the man who killed him. The Timekeeper's scroll tracks their footsteps eastward, into a territory defined by wandering, to lay the foundation stones of a profoundly dark empire. What exactly did Awan help Cain build when they finally stopped walking in the land of Nod? Dust settling in a territory where no human foot has ever stepped, east of the garden. A man marked by God drives the first wooden stake into the ground of a wilderness called Nod. Beside him stands Awan. Genesis 4, 17 inches, the King James Version reads, "And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived, and bare Enoch. And he builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch." Stop right there. Look at the terrifying reversal buried in this single verse. Just 5 verses earlier, the Lord handed down the murderer's punishment. "A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth." The sentence was eternal wandering. No rest, no permanent home. But the marked man walks into the desert, takes his sister, and immediately does the exact opposite of wandering. He builds a city, he builds walls. He tries to lock himself in place. He is terrified of the earth. And Awan is the woman who helps him build his fortress. Look closely at the name she gives her firstborn son. In Hebrew, the name is Chanok. It means dedicated, initiated, or inaugurated. Dedicated to what? This is not a holy dedication. This is the inauguration of the first human empire, completely severed from the presence of the Lord. The canonical scroll tells us he built the city, but the timekeeper's scroll from Ethiopia gives us the exact moment human architecture was born out of a murderer's paranoia. Jubilees 4 to 9 states, and in the first year of the first week of the 5th Jubilee, houses were built on the earth, and Cain built a city, and called its name after the name of his son Enoch. Houses were built on the earth. Picture it. The earth has never seen a wall. It has never seen a locked door. Until this exact Jubilee week, humanity lived in the open, sleeping in tents or beneath the canopy of trees. But Cain has a mark on his flesh, a constant reminder of the blood screaming from the soil. So he digs into the dirt of Nod. He stacks stone upon stone. He builds the first barrier between himself and the rest of creation. And Awan is the mother of this walled-in civilization. I offer it as that, one tradition's record. But sit with the psychological weight of what Jubilees proposes. Awan did not just walk away from her grieving parents. She actively anchored the bloodline of the exile. She gave Cain a son, Chanoch, the dedicated one. And together, they dedicated the first human city to absolute independence from God. Every brick Cain laid in Nod was an act of defiance against his curse to wander. And every child Awan bore inside those walls carried the genetic memory of a slaughtered uncle and a fugitive father. This is the origin of the world's first dynasty. Not a kingdom built on divine right, but a fortress built on guilt. Same marked man, same exiled sister, same dark foundation. But as Awan raises the inaugurated son, inside the walls of Enoch, the timeline in Jubilees forces our eyes to shift back westward, back to the camp they abandoned, because Adam and Eve did not stop having children when the murderer and his bride walked away. The Genesis ledger still has names to record. A dark lineage has taken root in the east, but the blood of Abel is about to be replaced. If Awan became the mother of the murderer's fortress, who was the second sister born into the grief of Eden to carry the lineage of the righteous? A woman holds a new infant in a camp missing two of its original sons. One is buried in the dirt of the field. The other is a fugitive, wandering the eastern wasteland. Genesis 4:25 reads, "And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew." Stop right there. Look at the word appointed. The Hebrew root for Seth is shith. It means to put, to place, to set, or to replace. He is the substitute. The canonical scroll locks our eyes entirely on this male heir. Genesis 5 hinges the entire future of the human race on Seth's bloodline, because Cain's line is permanently disqualified by blood guilt. But the biological absolute of the first generation remains unchanged. Seth cannot carry the lineage to Noah alone. He needs a wife. The ancient timekeeper's scroll steps into this gap and gives the replacement seed his counterpart. Jubilees 4:11 states, "And in the 6th week he begat his daughter Azura." Read that again. Azura, the second sister, born right on the heels of Seth in the 5th Jubilee. If Awan, the first daughter, carried a name echoing with iniquity or shadow, Azura's name shifts the atmosphere. In Hebrew tradition, roots connected to Azura echo Atzar, meaning to enclose, to retain, or to protect. She is the retained one, the protected daughter. Born into the devastation of a fractured family, she does not walk east, she stays. Picture it. Azura grows up in a camp heavy with ghosts. She never met Abel, she never knew the older brother who walked away with her sister Awan into the land of Nod. She only knows the grief of her aging parents and the weight placed on the shoulders of her brother Seth to rebuild what was broken. I offer this as one reading, not the final word. But the narrative weight of Jubilees changes how we see the origins of the righteous bloodline. Because just as Cain took Awan, Seth must take a bride. Jubilees 4:11 continues. And Seth took Azura, his sister, to be his wife, and in the 4th year of the 5th week she bare him Enos. 2 sisters, 2 entirely different trajectories out of Eden. Same parents, same biology, 2 destinies. Awan's marriage was sealed in the land of wandering, actively building a fortress to hide a marked man from the presence of the Lord. Azura's marriage is sealed in the camp of the righteous. She binds herself to the replacement seed. And watch what happens the moment Azura gives birth to her firstborn. Genesis 4:26 records the exact result of this union. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. A sharp dividing line has just been cut into the dirt of the pre-flood world. Awan is in the east, mothering a city of fugitives. Azura is in the west, mothering a generation that drops to its knees and calls on the name of Yahweh. The blank space in the Genesis genealogy is no longer empty. It is filled by a woman who chose to anchor the holy seed. But as Azura's children begin to pray, Awan's children inside the walled city are beginning to build something far more dangerous than houses. What was the shadow lineage forging in the east while the protected lineage worshipped in the west? Sparks hit the dirt in the land of Nod. The ringing of a heavy hammer striking an anvil echoes over the stone walls of the city of Enoch. Genesis 4:22 records the birth of a man named Tubal-cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. Stop right there. Brass and iron. The canonical scroll tells us exactly what the descendants of Cain are doing inside that exiled fortress. They are not just building houses anymore, they are forging weapons. Tubal-cain is the 7th generation from Adam through the exiled line. He is the great-great-great-grandson of Awan, the woman who walked away from Eden with the murderer, and he is teaching men how to make swords. Read that again. The first metallurgical industry on Earth is not born from a desire to build plows. It is born in the bloodline of the first killer, locked inside the first walled city, driven by the paranoia of a marked man. Just one verse later, in Genesis 4:23, Tubal-cain's father Lamech holds one of those newly forged weapons and sings a terrifying song to his 2 wives. I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. Sit with that. This is the legacy of the first sister. Awan's household has devolved into a culture of industrial violence and unchecked arrogance. They are multiplying, they are arming themselves, and they are openly mocking the justice of the Lord. They are building an empire of force. But shift your eyes back to the west, to the unwalled camp of the second sister. Azura's household is living an entirely different reality. Genesis 4:26 anchors her lineage. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. The Hebrew word for call here is kara. It means to cry out, to proclaim, to summon. 2 households, 2 paths, 2 destinies. While Awan's great-grandsons are pulling iron from the earth to make blades, Azura's great-grandsons are building altars. While Lamech sings a poem about murder, Enos is teaching his children how to pray. The ancient Jewish traditions, echoed in the Targums and broader Midrashic texts, view this era as a period of absolute, rigid separation. The righteous seed of Seth and Azura stayed in the highlands, living in the shadow of closed Eden. The corrupted seed of Cain and Awan remained in the lowlands, expanding their violent, mechanical empire. two worlds, built by two sisters who once shared the same fire. For centuries, these two civilizations do not touch. The Timekeeper's scroll meticulously tracks the Jubilees as the two lineages grow parallel to each other. The daughters of Awan paint their faces and sing to the sound of the harp and organ crafted by Jubal. The sons of Azura track the stars and preserve the memory of the Creator. I offer it as that, one tradition's record of the divide. The canonical text simply lists the names, placing the violent genealogy of chapter 4 back to back with the holy genealogy of chapter 5. But when you overlay the names of Awan and Azura from the Ethiopian preservation, you realize you are looking at the ultimate family fracture. The entire pre-flood world is split between the grief of one sister and the protection of the other. They are the foundational mothers of the first human conflict. But if these two women are the literal architects of the divided pre-flood world, why does our canonical Genesis scroll deliberately erase them? What was the Hebrew author protecting when he stripped the ink from their names? A stylus presses into rough animal skin. The ink forms the opening line of a massive ancestral ledger. Genesis 5:1 reads, "This is the book of the generations of Adam." The canonical scroll begins to unroll the history of humanity, counting the centuries, marking the deaths. But as it does, a very intentional erasure is taking place right in front of our eyes. We have seen the names Awan and Azura preserved in the highlands of Ethiopia. We have watched them walk into the divided wilderness to anchor the two opposing empires of the pre-flood earth. But when we look back at our canonical Genesis text, the ink is gone. Genesis 5:4 reduces the mothers of humanity to 5 dismissive words, and he begat sons and daughters. Sit with that. If these two sisters are the literal architects of the divided world, why does the canonical author strip them of their identities? To understand the silence, you have to look at the first prophecy ever spoken into the dirt. Go back to the garden. Genesis 3:15. The Lord speaks directly to the serpent, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." Stop right there. Look at the word seed. In Hebrew, it is zera, offspring, lineage. From the moment the gates of Eden lock, the canonical text of Genesis ceases to be a comprehensive historical record. It becomes a strict legal document. It is obsessed with tracking one single, violently contested thread, the holy zera. The author of Genesis is not writing a census of the ancient world. He is writing a trajectory. Every chapter is carefully designed to trace that singular bloodline down through the chaos of history, moving from Seth to Noah to Abraham, and eventually to the bruised heel of the Messiah. The names of the early daughters are not lost by ancient accident. They are deliberately subordinated to the rhythm of the zera. Read that again. The anonymity of the first women in Genesis is a theological boundary. In ancient Hebrew record-keeping, the legal markers of the promise passed through the patriarchs. The scroll forces our eyes exclusively onto the fathers to maintain a terrifying, unyielding focus on the unbroken chain of the Savior's lineage. To pause and trace the maternal lines would break the momentum of the zera. But there is a darker reason for the erasure. The text is tracking a cosmic war. Centuries later, the New Testament looks back at the first murder and identifies exactly what was happening in the land of Nod. 1 John 3:12 warns the church, "Not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. Cain carried the nature of the serpent. Seth carried the nature of the promise." The enmity prophesied in Eden was playing out in the very first generation. This is one reading, not the final word. But when you place the Timekeeper's Scroll of Jubilees next to the canonical Scroll of Genesis, you see two completely different agendas. Genesis wants to track the Holy Zera as fast as possible to the flood. It leaves the women unnamed to keep the legal line clean. But the text of Jubilees refuses to let the women vanish. It argues that you cannot truly understand the enmity of Genesis 3, the vicious war between the two seeds, unless you know exactly whose wombs carried them. Awan bore the seed of the fugitive. Azura protected the seed of the promise. Two sisters, two seeds, two destinies playing out across a virgin earth. But what happens when we take the missing ink from the Ethiopian preservation and write those two names back into the margins of our canonical Bible? What do we finally see when we look at the oldest question in Genesis and realize the answer was never a stranger from an unknown land? Go back to the edge of the garden where this film began. A marked man walks east into a wilderness called Nod. The dust is still settling from the first murder. The blood is still crying out from the soil. You have read Genesis 4 100 times. You have pictured Cain walking alone into the blank space of the text, stumbling into an unnamed territory, and mysteriously finding a wife among the shadows. But tonight, you have the missing ink. See the scene again. He is not walking alone. Matching his pace into the wasteland, turning her back on her grieving parents, is the victim's little sister, Awan. Same desert, same exile. But the isolation is permanently shattered. Genesis 5-4 beats its relentless drum, and he begat sons and daughters. The canonical scroll deliberately erases their names to keep our eyes locked on the Zera, the holy seed, pushing relentlessly toward Noah, toward Abraham, and ultimately toward the Messiah. The legal ledger of the Hebrews demands an unbroken male chain to prove the right of the coming king. To pause and trace the wombs of the first women would break the momentum of the prophecy spoken in Eden. But the Book of Jubilees, preserved high in the mountains of Ethiopia, refuses to let the mothers of the earth vanish into a plural noun. It reaches into the blank space of Genesis and pulls out two sisters, two women born into the dawn of the world, standing at the epicenter of the greatest fracture in human history. Awan goes east with the murderer. She mothers a walled city built on paranoia. Her great-grandsons pull iron from the dirt, forging the first swords and singing songs of vengeance. She anchors the empire of force. Azura stays west in the camp of the righteous. She binds herself to Seth, the replacement seed. Her grandson Enos teaches the remaining family how to drop to their knees in the dirt. She anchors the empire of altars, two households, two sisters, two destinies playing out across a virgin earth. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact. Test it the way the Bereans tested everything. The canonical scroll is our absolute anchor, and its silence is inspired. It strips the names to protect the trajectory of the promise. But the ancient timekeeper's scroll gives us a terrifying, intimate window into what actually happened outside the gates of Eden. It resolves the oldest question in Genesis. Cain did not find a stranger in the land of Nod. He took his sister with him. It forces us to look at the first two civilizations not as abstract theological concepts, but as a family permanently broken in two. Yet the desert is still holding the rest. The mathematical ledger of Jubilees gives us the weeks and the years, but it cannot give us the heart. We do not know if Awan wept when she left the camp. We do not know if she was dragged into the eastern wastes by a violent brother, or if she willingly carried the shadow of her name into the fortress of Enoch. The scroll does not say. We only know that the cosmic war between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman did not begin with massive nations colliding. It began at a single fire, with two sisters choosing different paths into the dark. If you made it to the end, comment the word "watched" down below. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep tracing the lost threads of the ancient world together. And send this video to one person who loves the mysteries of Genesis but has never heard the names of humanity's first daughters.